they felt like their last CPA or their last outsourced accounting, whatever it is, didn't understand what they needed. They weren't listening. They weren't responsive. And those are things that are a choice. So I am choosing to be responsive. I'm choosing to be proactive and look for ways to add value for people and for families.
Welcome to Beyond the Ledger, real conversations with people driving business forward. I'm Troy Ashby, CPA and host. Each episode, we unpack stories, challenges, and insights from today's top accounting and finance leaders. This podcast is brought to you by my friends over at MarketScale.
Welcome back to Beyond the Ledger. Today's guest is Tom Kirkhart. He's a CPA who has served as a CFO for Nasdaq and PE-backed organizations across manufacturing, construction, and service industries. Tom is known for driving acquisitions, tightening operations, and finding real savings without breaking what makes a business work. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. Hey, before we dig in, I would love for you to really just open it up and share with our audience a little bit that people can't find about you on LinkedIn or your resume.
Yeah, I've been really fortunate to have the people that I've worked for and the people that I've worked with. Going back to when I was at Ernst Young, I worked with some really amazing people, and I just learned so much from them. My first senior was a guy named David Sadler, who to this day is probably the smartest man I've ever really interacted with. I just learned from him so much sort of grace under pressure, and realizing that in accounting nobody dies. It's an emergency, but it's an emergency that everything's going to turn out okay.
Yeah.
I feel like I was brought up with really good mentorship.
Yeah.
And, that mentorship had different forms. It was very candid. It was raw. And it was also constructive. It was just kind of thinking about how that sort of helped me or stuck with me throughout my career is at different times I have provided difficult feedback. I try to do it in a way that's respectful, and ultimately, as I've gotten older, I've gotten more gracious about it. It's almost like constructive criticism should be done, or at least I've come to start doing it in a way that's almost loving, right? It's, I want you to be this, and you want to be this if you knew that you wanted to be this. It's not coming down from above, it's coming from right here. Like, if it's you and I, let's bring ourselves to the same place and understand and come to agree of what needs to happen.
I think over my career, what I've found from feedback is, especially accountants, sometimes having those tough conversations just doesn't happen. But what you just said, everybody's craving. Done the right way, feedback allows you to grow.
Yeah.
Both as the leader, but also as the person that you're providing the feedback to. So it was awesome for him to demonstrate that, because then you got to carry it into your career, it sounds like. EY was where you started? That was your foundation?
Correct.
How long did you stay there?
I was at Ernst Young for 4 years.
Okay. All right.
And I
Here
was
in Dallas?
Actually in Phoenix.
All right.
So I was in the real estate practice in the Phoenix office, and most of my time I worked on the Starwood Hotel's Audit, which now that's part of the Marriott group, but on its own, it was sort of a Fortune 500 sort of client. So it was within the office. To me, it felt like a pretty important place to be. I felt actually pretty proud to be a part of that. And then with a big engagement like that, you have a lot of people on the engagement. There's always a goal to have continuity. And so we had our own sort of culture that, like I mentioned, David was a provider of feedback. I eventually became a provider of feedback.
Yeah.
I don't think I ever fully moved into the big man's chair there, because that was a lot to fill. But I benefited a lot from being part of kind of a culture of let's build each other and let's build a team.
Yeah.
And,
well, that foundation in Big Four, it's kind of the mark of a lot of successful, not that it's a requirement, but that is a mark that will always take you on through your career. At what point did you know at some point you weren't going to go the partner track, or, talking about something, because public's not for everybody.
No, it's not.
I started, I was at Anderson, then EY, but I didn't make it 4 years. So, but I would love to hear your take on just working through some of the nuances, especially coming through Big Four.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back before I joined Ernst Young, before I went to grad school, I briefly worked for the University of Arizona in the accounting function. I decided that I didn't like that. That didn't go great for me. And so I knew something that wasn't going to work for me. So then when I got the opportunity to go work for Ernst Young, I initially had sort of set for myself the idea, I'm going to work here forever, because I decided that that partner track was what success looked like. I wanted that. And then the reality is you start to learn more about what that might mean for you, what that might mean for your family. There's just also sort of the uncertainty of, if I'm going to dedicate, say, 12 years of my life to becoming a partner, and what happens if you don't become a partner. But after 3 or 4 years, you've probably learned enough that you have a lot of skills and knowledge that you can take with you to build a career. I worked with some private equity-backed organizations. I did some audits of a handful of these organizations, and they all had a CFO. And I sort of saw that'd be a great career path, because I saw that as a different mark of success. One where there was many doors, as opposed to, for example, in the Phoenix office, not that you'd have to make partner in the Phoenix office, but in the Phoenix office, only one new partner a year, let's say. I mean, I made that number up, but they weren't promoting 5 people to partner every year. Yeah. Smaller office, that's just the nature of it. So competition can be really quite stiff. But when you think about different avenues to be successful, more options gives you more opportunity to reach some level of what we call success. Yeah. So after my 4th busy season, my wife, she had our first child. It was just kind of time. Sure. I didn't feel like I needed to continue to think about, I'm going to be a partner someday. Yeah, so some of that's your own pressure that you put on yourself. Right? Like the mark of success isn't just straight up and down. Yeah, right. So what do you call success? How do you define success? And there's lots of ways to be successful, so long as you don't define it as narrowly as maybe I did when I was 25 years old. Right. At some point in there, I decided, well, being successful would be becoming a CFO. Yep. And so, fast forward, skipping a lot of steps, at age 38, I became CFO of a publicly traded company. In my mind, that seemed like that was success. Check the box. I achieved that goal at 38 years old, which is interesting because I had, at that point, up to 30 more years where I might be working. Sure. So what do you do with the rest of your time? Yeah. If I'd spent living life, but while living life, I was sort of chasing, goals. Sure. And so let me pause you there. Yeah. I'm curious because CFO for a company that size, very successful. And you're right. So now what's next? Like, how do you set that next mark of success? And I know you kind of went through, tons of different M&A and different things like that. But were you, as you chose different roles, whether internally or externally, did you have an internal barometer of what I have 30 more years left? What is that next thing, that mark of success? What were you looking for to stay challenged? Maybe this is a strange way to answer it, but staying challenged really was its own sort of goal within that. Mm-hmm. Every job I've had, I've learned something, and I've very much have valued that. Sure. Because that becomes an asset for the rest of my life. If I learn something and I know something, that's mine. That becomes my tool. That becomes kind of my asset. Is there anything that either you've noticed through, and maybe ask you to dive in on some skills that you've gained, but is there anything that just stands out, either one, that helped you find that next role, or two, when you've been interviewing, that something in somebody's background has them stand out? Like through your career, these pieces of challenge that you're going for, they're leaving marks that end up on the resume that allow you that next opportunity. Is there anything that sticks out to you? Forever ago, my dad was one of the wisest guys I knew. I didn't know very many grown men, so that's probably part of it. That helps. But he told me that I needed to find something that was hard that I could do, because that would make me valuable. If there was something that I was good at and others found difficult, that's something I should move towards. And just sort of as a strategy for thinking about, he said these sorts of things to me when I was a teenager. That sort of thought is really, I've taken with me throughout my career. What I like to do is I try to take on more things. My first role, I worked for the FP&A. I worked for the director of FP&A at my first role after public accounting. Making myself available, being ambitious. I ended up being deeply involved with monthly close. And sort of, I allowed myself to sort of fan out. I wasn't protective of, this is my job and I'm going to just do my job. It was more like, I'm going to do my job, as a matter of course, what can I do to help the people around me? And through that, I gained new experiences. I worked with an implementation of SAP very early on because I was there, I was present, I was willing, I was excited to do it because I saw it as a challenge, and that's a good thing for me. And so through that, I basically ended up becoming the assistant controller. The assistant controller we had, I thought she was fine, but somehow or another, this was a PE-backed organization, so PE usually look for ways to save money or do the same for less. I sort of ended up absorbing her duties while retaining most of mine. So I ended up being pretty young and wearing a couple hats and being a value proposition.
Yeah.
But the value proposition was great for me because now all of a sudden I was sort of qualified to be an FP&A leader, because I worked for the director of FP&A for a couple of years. And I was sort of qualified to be a controller because I worked for the controller for a couple of years. Now, I wasn't the controller at that organization, and I was not the director of FP&A at that organization either, but I worked very closely with both of them. Having worked very closely with the both of them, I sort of started to feel the connection between those things. They're often siloed, but they don't really need to be.
Sure.
And so really, that point forward, I've mostly either just the function, the way the role is structured, or kind of how I've just tried to gravitate and create a role is it's very blended. I've done budgeting and forecasting really all throughout my career, though at times my title was controller. I've always been involved with closing the books in some capacity or reporting the numbers in some capacity, even though sometimes I might have a title that's director of finance. I guess I don't guard my time in the way that I feel like some people maybe do. And I think that's probably been advantageous for me because allowing myself to give an extra few hours here and there, it's just opportunities to learn more.
It's funny. What I'm hearing you say is you're doing the next job before you're given it. You're learning some skills.
Sure, trying to. Yes.
You're investing in yourself, which is investing in the company, which allows you to grow faster. And I think that's a great lesson because sometimes we come in and somebody just does the job that they're given.
Yeah.
And now you may have a boss that isn't delegating or allocating, but if you're asking for it, you're adding value, you're making your boss's job easier, or the PE firms are able to potentially save some money, you're onto something. And it sounds like
Absolutely.
You've almost naturally done that because of who you are. But I think that's a great thing for people to hear is take on that extra project.
Yeah.
Figure out a way to figure it out.
Yeah.
Or find a way to figure it out.
Yeah, no. Your goal is to help the people around you up, down, sideways, and ultimately help the organization.
Yep.
And I've been very fortunate to have been able to take a lot of learning lessons. And you're right, I have generally tried to do, I found myself creeping into kind of the next job up.
Yeah.
Right, and that's making yourself available, willing, just being a helpful resource, and just allow that sort of growth to happen sort of organically.
Well, and I think, in what I do, if you're not getting some of the next job duties under your belt, it's hard to take a position of growth.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're taking a lateral role for the upside later. So I think you've done it, whether it be intentional or not. I think that's been a great lesson for people to hear. So the next thing I really wanted to dive into, you've been a CFO for a number of years now, and both publicly traded and PE-backed. Just curious, I don't want you to pick your favorite because they're all unique and different, but
Sure.
What are some of the dynamics and the differences in those CFO roles?
What's interesting is that many of the things that happen are the same. There's a board of directors. You report to the board of directors. Opinions will vary from time to time, and sometimes opinions change a lot from interaction to interaction. And the differences are smaller than the similarities. There's the idea that private equity can be longer term, longer minded because they don't have a quarterly number they're trying to hit. The reality is a private equity environment, you still have a quarterly number that you're trying to hit.
Sure.
And, the board has those expectations. The difference is, there's maybe not an investing public that will react to the number. Even still, you can be long-sighted in a publicly traded. Just because there's a quarterly earnings doesn't change the fact that the value proposition may take years to unfold. It just might be more interesting along the way.
You said something that I think is maybe it's people that are aspiring for the CFO seat. One of the things when we do the CFO searches that is they want the person to have is board presence or communication ability. Oftentimes, they don't want to see 10 pages in a big slide deck. They want it to be buttoned up in a short, concise message and then be ready to answer questions. Have you found fine-tuning your communication being instrumental?
Being a strong communicator is useful in really every facet of life, and it's probably more important when you are in a position where the words you say will be scrutinized. If a number is challenged, which what I have found is, at least in my experience, my private equity board was far more involved and more, motivated to dig into numbers. Being on your toes, knowing sort of the back story behind the numbers, and being able to explain in a way that isn't 10 pages of spreadsheets and PowerPoints, but here's the 2 or 3 things that happened. One of these things we can mitigate going forward.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's things that it's just a one-off that happened. I can't fix it now, but we can fix it going forward. Communication is extremely important, just as a matter of course.
Sure.
And the funny thing is accountants aren't really known for being communicators. I feel like I'm probably a better than average communicator, at least for an accountant. And so that served me well. I think for up-and-coming CPA types, if you can't stand in front of people for 5 minutes and explain something, it doesn't have to be accounting, but just explain something.
Yeah.
If you can't do that in a way that you're proud of, you need to figure out how to improve on that, because you've just created a weak spot for yourself.
Yeah.
Eventually, that will be a stumbling.
Right. And sometimes CFOs can be, your background is publicly traded, PE-backed. Sometimes it's founder-led. And oftentimes you're in a seat where you're the trusted advisor and you've got to be able to communicate financial numbers to a non-financial person.
Yeah.
So to your point, concise communication with confidence gives them confidence in, one, your job, but also how they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I would love to pivot a little bit, because buried the lead a little bit here, because you've had this tremendous career and a venture that you've jumped into head first, not feet. I'd love to hear kind of what you've been doing over the last 4 or 5 months.
Sure. Yeah. So head first and feet first.
Belly flop?
Not yet. It's too early to say belly flop. Yeah, so early on in my career, I set the goal to be a CFO because I thought that's what success looked like. At 38 years old, I became a CFO, and I did that for a number of years. And so what comes next for me is I'm going to be an entrepreneur. And I've pretty quickly acquired my first couple dozen tax clients. With those, I've acquired a couple lined up engagements to be a fractional CFO. And so the goal for me is to be a trusted advisor to individuals who have interesting personal financial needs or situations, and then also to be a trusted financial advisor to growing businesses.
Yeah.
It's going to be a very relationship-focused sort of thing.
Well, and your foundation sets you up for that. You've been through public accounting. You've been in the CFO suite. You know the levers that can impact whatever size these companies are. It's a competitive space. It is a lot about relationships, a lot about what you've done. How are you setting yourself up? Like, what's your differentiator? How did you win your first dozen clients? What those two fractional, like, what is it about Tom and or what your message is that's kind of got you off to a really fast start?
I think I'm off to a pretty fast start. Yeah. What I have found is that there is a need for trusted advisors. What I have found is that, at least the people that I've brought on board or I've been able to win a relationship with, is they felt like their last CPA or their last outsourced accounting, whatever it is, didn't understand what they needed. They weren't listening. They weren't responsive. And those are things that are a choice. So I am choosing to be responsive. I'm choosing to be proactive and look for ways to add value for people and for families.
Yeah.
If I have a client, it's kind of a strange background. I got a text message from an unknown person probably about 7 o'clock in the evening, quite flustered about a tax situation. I ended up being on the phone with her for an hour and a half that evening and really sorted it through. And once we get on the other side of the tax situation, I'm going to put together really a full business plan for her and her family, because they have some things in place that are great assets to have that are underutilized. I think they realize that they're underutilized, but they don't see a way from underutilized to fully utilized.
Yeah.
Where I know people who will make investments. I know people who have different resources that they can bring to the situation where I can bring this together, and I'm going to build a plan for them where they don't know it, but they're actually a very wealthy family.
Yeah.
We're going to make a plan, we're going to work a plan.
And here's what I heard. You showed up, you allocated a lot of time after hours, and it was a time that was a high stress environment. And so you came alongside and were able to help them with the immediate need and earn future business. And being available is sometimes the biggest complaint you hear about trusted advisors is I can't get them to call me back. So I love that because you are taking a personal interest in these clients. All right, so before I let you go, I would love for you to pick one, maybe two things of what is something either that you did or that you would recommend somebody aspiring to the top financial seat that they could do sitting in their seat right now, whether it be 5 or 10 years prior.
I think the most important thing, at least in my experience, is a versatile set of experiences. So if you're a controller, you need to make sure that you are hands-on with some or all of the budgeting process. You need to work with your local, maybe it's a general manager, maybe it's a VP of ops, someone. You need to be a resource for them for budgeting, or you need to support them in a very hands-on way on a monthly or quarterly basis so that way you learn from them. And it's being well-rounded opens doors. At least that's been my kind of experience, and that's how I look at it. So the aspiring CFO, look for ways to be well-rounded, and sort of the way to do that is you make yourself available. It's important to protect your time because you don't get more of that. But if you can be a valuable person to others in the organization, you're going to learn more than you're teaching.
Yeah.
I would advise just looking for ways to be useful and well-rounded.
It's a great piece of advice because it's the one thing that could hold you back if you're missing the piece, that one piece that they need, whether it be finance or banking or treasury, whatever that is, seek that out.
Yeah.
That is a great way to end. I've enjoyed our time. Thank you so much for coming.
Absolutely. It's good chat with you, Troy.
Yep.
I'm Troy Ashby, and remember, people are more than their titles, and companies are more than their balance sheets. Follow Beyond the Ledger so you never miss an episode.